Hello everybody and welcome to another video of one of my personal games. I played a game last night in the London League against Ed Holland, who is rated 207 ECF and over 2200 FIDE, so he could be a candidate master if he wanted to be. This was played in the London League between Drunken Knights 2 and Streatham, and I am a member of Drunken Knights. The time limit for this game was 75 minutes for the first 30 moves, and then after that, 20 minutes extra for each player to finish off the game on the night. And for this video, I thought there's a theme in this game, which is what's the most important thing in the position? What's the most important area of the board and feature of the position? So I started with my usual c4, and my opponent played e5. I fianchetto, and he does likewise. Then knight c3. That's always played in the English, so I may as well play it. And black has several options. There's d6, which would keep the position fairly closed and allow for a King's Indian type setup. Knight c6 is often played. Knight e7 is a bit rarer, but it also is playable. Knight f6 also allows a King's Indian type setup. But the move he played was f5, so a more aggressive system. This is a line of the Dutch, and it can transpose into an advantageous King's Indian if white allows it. The usual move here is d4 from white after black plays knight f6. So one possible move I have is e3, then after knight f6, d4. But here I chose to play a more combative move, e4. And this takes the position into new territory. I'm not sure there are any games that have been played with this setup. No noticeable games anyway. I've searched the databases. So I put this on the computer, and it eventually gave the best move for black being taking my e-pawn, and after I recapture with the knight, then knight f6 from black is fine, and I can play either d3, d4, knight e2, knight takes knight. I've got lots of options on the table here. Again, I know d4 would be a pawn sack, but it would be fairly interesting to play. I like that kind of position. However, knight f6 immediately was played, and in this kind of English Botvinnik against the Dutch, normally playing e4 takes f5 is better for white. So I test that out now by taking. After the recapture, what is the most important thing in the position? We've both fianchettoed, we've both developed a knight. Neither of us has castled yet. And, more importantly, have a look at the pawn structures. We both have 4 pawns on the queen side. I've advanced the c-pawn. And black has 3 pawns on the king side with the E, F, and H pawns, and I have the F, G, and H pawns. So I decided to try and mess up the pawn structure a little. I played d4 with the idea of taking on e5, where the F pawn is now on its own, isolated. So maybe I could take advantage of that later in the game. On a side note, the computer gives knight f3 but I felt it was taking the position into familiar territory after knight c6, castles, castles, d4, e4, knight e5. And here we have, this looks fairly normal for a position from the English or the Queen's Pawn opening against the Dutch. And I'm usually quite uncomfortable playing against Black's pawn wedge on e4. It's very, very annoying as my bishop is confined to the g2 square for a while. So I don't play the regular book move, transposing back into regular games. I play d4. And I thought if e4 is played here from Black, perhaps I could put my knight onto f4 by going to e2 and then jumping onto f4. So then I wasn't so concerned about the e4 push. And if e takes d4, I can recapture with the queen, and again the pawn on f5 is very, very weak. And as Black hasn't castled yet, there are no discovered attacks by moving his knight and attacking my queen with his bishop, as the bishop is currently undefended. So I did not see the next move, knight c6. It's a very good move. It develops a piece, defends the pawn, and attacks my pawn as well. So if I were to just follow my plan and take, I felt that here perhaps his very good development would make up for the pawn structure weakness. D takes e5 and either queen e7 or knight takes e5 does look very good for Black because my c pawn is becoming a target, along with his f5 pawn becoming a target. And I'm not so sure that I have such an ironclad advantage. So I thought for a while, and then I decided that the most important part of this position was that we've now both got two pawns out, controlling the centre. We both developed pieces, neither of us has castled, but the one thing that's really different is that my c1 bishop, my dark squared bishop, is able to move to g5, e3, d2 if I wished it, at any point, whereas his bishop, and subsequently his a8 rook, is quite hard to develop. So I decided on the plan of restricting Black, of trying to cramp up the position and make his life very, very difficult in terms of maneuvering pieces. So I played d5, gaining some space. Knight d4, it's quite aggressive. And I thought for quite a long time, and I rather regret I didn't play the move I was looking at. I had thought about a clearance sacrifice with d6. Oh, no, not a clearance sacrifice, a sacrifice. What this does is, if Black doesn't take the pawn, I can reinforce it with c5. If he does, then it's incredibly hard to develop the c8 bishop. Now there are two pawns stopping it moving along its natural diagonal, and my bishop on g2 is preventing the b6 pawn moving as it's pinned to the rook. So I could perhaps take advantage of this with knight g to e2, takes, queen takes, and at this point I'd analysed as far as castles, castles, and I thought perhaps d5 would be okay for Black, giving back the pawn, and now the bishop is free to move once again, and Black does have a pawn majority in the centre, which could be very annoying to play against in the middle game. But perhaps I should have considered this more, because rook d1 targets the backward d6 pawn, and I do own that d5 square. I'm completely in command of the light squares. So the position could transpose into something along these lines, where I'm now quite happy if I were to have this as white. I'm a pawn up. D6 pawn is still a bit weak, and I don't really think I'm in too much trouble. Black could play rook f to d8 next move, and then argue that he's got some pressure on my queen side, but this is the kind of position I can play quite well. So maybe d6 wasn't such a silly move. I don't play it though. Instead, I play knight g to e2 immediately. I just wanted to get rid of his d4 knight. He wants to keep it with c5, and only now do I play d6. But first, I'd looked at b4 for a long time. It's another pawn break, and again, it's just trying to mess up Black's coordination and pawn structure. But I'd seen that after a while, c takes b4, knight takes knight. If he takes on c3, I have knight takes f5, so e takes, knight b5, check, and now I feel that I'm the one who is quite badly coordinated at this point. I think maybe queen e2 is the best move. Takes, takes, castles. And Black does have some problem with coordinating the pieces, with the bishop still being trapped. But quite soon, I think b6 along with bishop b7 can be played. So I'm a pawn down, and I just don't like this position. I don't feel that I'm getting enough counterplay for the pawn. So I didn't play b4, although I did want to play that. I played d6, again with the idea of locking up the bishop. And here, the only move which I thought challenged me was queen b6, going after the pawn at once. If white castles, then I thought I had a fairly nice position after bishop g5, pinning the knight, or even knight d5 immediately. So, unfortunately, he did play queen b6, not letting me be comfortable. And we're only at move 10. But already there have been quite a lot of problems set for Black, and he's had to go about solving those problems to the best of his ability. I've also had things to deal with. My main challenge is getting rid of his knight on d4. And at this point in the game, after 10 moves, I had used up half an hour, so I had 45 minutes left for the next 20 moves. He only had 22 minutes for the rest of the game, up to move 30. So I thought perhaps if I could just keep on creating complications, I could maybe run him down on time and get him to make errors. So his big advantage is in having that knight on d4. So I take it. He takes with the c pawn. And immediately he's got a passed pawn on d4, which is protected by the e5 pawn. So in the long term, if he can keep the pawn structure this way, he'll have a big advantage. So I need to work on piece play here. I need to improve my pieces, restrict his, and prove that the quality of the pieces is more important than his pawn structure. Knight b5 protects my d6 pawn, so I'm trying to anchor that pawn there. He castles. And here I had two options, and I think I chose the right one. One option is to play b4 and attempt to play c5 in a moment, and that would anchor the pawn on d6 forever. So a possible continuation is knight e4, queen b3, and that threatens c5 check, winning the black queen. King h8, a4, and again, if knight takes d6, there is c5, winning the piece. Black couldn't counter with a5, and here I realised that my move c5 is actually not so good, because queen c6, and what am I doing here? Black is attacking the base of my pawn chain on b4, and I don't really see that many good options for me. b6 is coming as well from black. So if I want to try and trap the queen or to improve my pawn structure more, I could try knight c7, aiming to play b5 at a certain point, maybe after bishop a3. But here, black has a fantastic move. Knight takes c5. So it's attacking my queen and my bishop on g2, and both his knight and queen are on prise, as well as the rook. But this does benefit black. After I take the queen, he takes the queen. Rook b1, knight takes c1, knight takes rook, d takes, rook takes, a takes. And look at how many pawns black has for the exchange. It's 2 pawns, and look at the passes. He's got a b pawn, a c pawn, a d pawn, all of them passed. Okay, I have the d6 pawn, but that looks like it's not going to survive contact with the enemy. And his 2 bishops against my rook and knight are going to be very powerful. I often say that if you have 2 bishops against rook and knight, you can sometimes even win with the 2 bishops. Drawing is very easy because the bishops coordinate so well, and the rook and knight are very hard to get working well together. So after knight b6, knight b6, bishop e6, maybe a5, b3, it already looks like black has a crushing advantage. So I didn't play b4. I know this is a long variation, but you sometimes have to calculate quite deep to see what's going on. I didn't calculate all the way there, but I saw that knight takes c5 was interesting, and it did look like my pieces were becoming quite badly placed. So I played the other option after castles. I played queen b3. So this immediately threatens c5, winning the black queen. Queen c5 was played, interesting move. And here I just decide that I'm going to be a little bit cautious, unlike the rest of this game, and castle. I'd looked at knight c7 briefly, but I was a bit worried about d6 becoming weak after rook b8. Unfortunately, I do not have knight a6, because if he takes, I take the rook, but queen a5 check, and I have nothing better than knight b4, saving my piece. But again, I've maneuvered the knight around for no good reason. The other move is bishop d2, threatening knight a6, but again, it looks like queen takes, no, not queen takes d6, what was his move here? Okay, he certainly he has moves. b6 could be played, possibly. Or, no, e4. e4 was his move. And this just doesn't look so good for me. Knight e4 as well is, I think, is possible in this position. So I don't really like this position for me. b5 could even be played to sacrifice the pawn and gain some activity for black. I'm just thinking that my pieces aren't that well coordinated. So it's an option to play that. It just doesn't really suit me. So instead I castle knight e8 to attack the pawn, and I defend it in a strange way. I play bishop g5. So it seems to be a good move because it's activating another piece and it connects the rooks. Also, I decided that the most important part of this position for the foreseeable future is my d6 pawn. If I can hold on to it for a while, then the cramping effect it's going to have on black's pieces is going to tell. If I lose it, though, quite quickly, then black should be able to coordinate the pieces and win the game because of the d4 pawn. So I need to help out my d6 pawn. If knight takes d6, I have bishop e7, which will pin the knight and win a piece. So bishop f6 was played, and now I drop the bishop back to d2. And here, if knight takes d6, I have bishop b4, which I think not only skewers the queen and to the knight and also the rook, but it even might win the queen. After the queen moves back to b6, I would have c5 check again. So I've got a deadly check if the black queen moves. He doesn't want that to happen, so he plays a5, which stops bishop b4 for now. But again, I like setting traps, so I play a3. Unfortunately, he finds a good move here. If black played a rather useless move that didn't really achieve much, rook b8, let's say, I have bishop b4 takes, pawn takes, and now where's the queen going? The only square where it's safe for this move is b6, and then I have c5 check again, winning the queen. So again, the most important feature of the position for me is not only defending d6, but it's trying to exploit the black queen. And all the tactics revolve around black's queen being in the center of the board and not very well supported. He does find a move that works, though. He plays e4. So now the queen has the e5 square to run to. I decide that defending the d6 pawn is still very, very important, so I need to protect it. And I play the move bishop f4. The reason I play this is that I looked at the move g4, actually, giving up the d6 pawn and trying to undermine black's central pawn mass. But after knight takes d6, knight takes, queen takes, c5 check doesn't work because queen e6 is playable. But g takes f5, queen e5, rook f e1, d5 takes, bishop f5. I'd looked this far, and at this point I felt that black was at least equal, if not winning, because that pawn mass again is very, very strong. It's defended by the two bishops and the queen as well, and my d5 pawn is going to be very hard to hold on to now, especially as pieces have been exchanged. I felt that I would lose that pawn and then lose the battle for central control, which could very easily turn into a simple win for black. So I hold off on the move g4 and play bishop f4. Finally, black is able to take the time to have a deep breath and develop a piece. That bishop has not moved all game, hasn't even been able to move, but now it gets into the game. So with my d6 pawn defended, that's still an important point. The d6 pawn is still good for anchoring down black's position, and it allows me to play knight c7 at some point in the future. But here I felt that the battle for the queen side is halted for now. I feel I've got the advantage on the queen side, with my knight holding down everything, as well as the d6 pawn being a good piece to have. But the king side might be a little bit weak, especially as he's got a bishop and rook, which are more active than my g2 bishop and f1 rook. The knight on e8 doesn't need to stay there. It could go to g7, then to e6. and also perhaps uh, the open space might allow him to do a hack attack, h5 and h4. So I decide that I'm going to switch my attack to the king side to try and take advantage of his poor development. I play g4, bishop b7, and now I take, and black's queen recaptures. So we're at move 20 now. The battle has raged quite a lot since move 10. And what's the most important feature of the position here? I think it's now, like I'd originally planned, it's all about the placement of the pieces. His bishop on b7 is now quite useful. His bishop, our dark squared bishops are performing useful functions. My knight on b5 is quite aggressive, and his knight is very passive and is not connecting the rooks. So I felt that I had better coordination, but if this makes sense, perhaps not better development, because my two rooks both are fairly undeveloped, but his f8 rook could very easily come into the game, and that makes up for his knight being very passive. So I need to be able to improve my pieces. I play bishop h6, and now his rook moves to f7. Then I switch the attack again to the king side with queen g3 check, and that's also another piece that's defending d6, king h8. And now I thought, what do I do with my pieces? I'd looked at bishop h3, but I was a bit concerned about the g file being a little weak, and my king and queen being on the g file might allow certain pins to be played. So I decided to develop my rook and attack the d4 pawn. But it turns out this is not such a good move. I had to be a bit worried about black being able to attack on the king side. Queen h5 luckily was not played in the game, because I don't see a good way of defending the bishop and keeping good coordination between the pieces. Queen h3 might have to be played, and then bishop h4. So black is now gaining some space, using the pieces very well, and that rook on f7 is about to leap into the game, because what's my bishop doing? It has to come back to c1. That might be the best move for it. And then maybe e3 just to cut off my bishop and attack the g2 bishop. I don't really see any good option besides knight takes d4, because if I take on b7, then bishop takes f2 and I'm losing the queen, rather annoyingly. So knight takes d4, trying to bring the knight back to defend, but then bishop takes f2 again. If I play king h1, queen takes h3, and if I take the bishop with my rook, then there are still horrible, horrible options. E takes f2 check, and then the d1 rook is hanging, and his queen can just take it next move. So this looks absolutely terrible for a position. I was very happy he didn't play this. I didn't see it till after the game. So after rook a d1, instead of the queen h5, bishop h4 maneuver, he immediately pushed his pawn with d3. And that does expand the control of his bishop on f6. It's attacking b2. And bishop e5 is playable next move. And I really didn't like his centre pawns cramping my pieces so much. So as we were playing this, I thought to myself, what's the most important thing in the position? And here I decided it wasn't anything on the board nothing on the board was the most important feature. What was most important was the clock. He only had about a minute left to make the last sort of 6 moves or so before move 30. I had about 25 minutes. So my moves here were designed to complicate the position as much as I could and try and get him to go wrong, or at least to sort of play moves that weren't the best. So I played rook takes d3. Now this is a slightly crazy looking move. I'm sacking the exchange for a pawn, but I felt now that his bishop on b7 is very, very useful. So if I can get rid of it, that's one of his best minor pieces. His rook on a8 would then have to move, and my bishop would have total control of the light squares. And I might even be able to win the exchange back if things got a little bit too scary for me. I also would have a passed f-pawn with a rook behind it that could be useful. And my d6 pawn is still cramping the black knight that is difficult to get back into the game. So e takes d3 was played, but after the game we looked at bishop e5. And this is a very good Zwischenzug because my queen needs to move, h4, and g3 was probably its best square. So he's improved his bishop and made my queen worse. So perhaps now, if he takes d3, I'll take on b7. And things aren't looking great, but I still would not mind playing this position. It's still very tricky. This is a possible line that could be played. Black is definitely better, but I may have chances to draw. This line is not completely forced, but it's a very likely sort of line to go down. This bishop on d5 could be very useful, and it is controlling lots and lots of key squares. My rook coming to f7 is a very strong possibility, and his king is also rather inactive on h8, whereas my king can be quite good in defense and attack on the queen side of the board and in the center. So maybe I could draw this, but I don't think I could win. My plan might be to play rook g4 and just completely shut off the black king. Anyway, this is a very, very long line to go down, but it's the kind of thing that can result from the position here. He didn't play bishop e5 though. He immediately took, and I captured. Then he played bishop e5, but because of our little exchange that's gone down, it gives me the option of playing a move besides queen h4. I have f4, which is, again, a very complicated move. I think maybe the best option is just not doing any, just playing rook b8, because I can't take the bishop as queen f1 would be checkmate. So rook b8 and then bishop g2 could be played, and now things would start to happen. Maybe bishop takes d6 is playable. However, rook f6 was played. I need to defend the bishop, so unfortunately I missed the best move in the position, which is bishop d5. I don't know why I'd have seen this. You need to be a computer. I'm threatening queen g8 checkmate, but in the game I completely dismissed this because rook g6 pins my queen. However, there's f takes e5, rook takes queen check, pawn takes rook, and now if the queen moves to safety, I have rook f8 checkmate. So queen takes f1, king takes, and after the black rook again gets to a safe square, I'm completely winning this position. this is just absolutely won because my two bishops are controlling everything, and my d6 pawn is now fully protected by my e5 pawn, and I may even be able to make one of them a passer in a moment and win that way. So I shouldn't have dismissed that move immediately, but then again, I probably wouldn't have seen all the way to the end. So I didn't play the strongest move. Instead, I played bishop g5, and at this point, we're at move 27. He has less than a minute. It's very hard to tell because we were playing on a analog clock. Yeah, it's very difficult to see exactly how much time your opponent has left, but I would guess only about 30 seconds. So he thought for a little while and then made the last very crucial mistake. I think here that it's lost for black, but maybe rook g6 is the best move. It's hard to tell. Instead, he took on f4. Then I played bishop f6 check, and he then ran out of time at move 28, just before the time control. So I was very, very happy to win this game because he was rated 207, which is 10 points higher than my own rating, and it's the highest rated person that I've beaten all season. And this is completely busted for black anyway, so I don't feel guilty having won on time alone. The continuation I'd seen was knight takes bishop, queen takes bishop, check, bishop g2, queen c5, king h1. And here I'm a piece up, and black doesn't really have any compensation for it. The d3 pawn will get swiftly taken in a moment. Maybe I can play rook d1 to d3. The knight's being attacked. It doesn't really have a good square to go to. And as long as I don't make a stupid move and get checkmated, I should win fairly easily here. So, again, I mean, the whole game was about what was most important in the particular position. So, just going through it very, very quickly. English opening, so light square control is most important. Then here it's about pawn structure. Sorry. So I attempt to improve the pawn structure. Then it's about locking down black's pieces and removing his big advantage, which was the knight, leaving him with a permanent but long-term advantage, which won't be realised until the end game. And then it becomes all about the placement of the pieces. So I improve my pieces and try to prove his are badly placed. That queen doesn't look too good. His knight's now very, very passive. My bishop's now active. His bishop's a little bit misplaced there because his knight can't come to f6 again. And I just keep on attacking his pieces and trying to make his look stupid. And then eventually, when he proves that he's got just enough to hold his pieces together, I think about maintaining my advantage with the d6 pawn. I allow him to develop a little, and then try to dominate the position all over the board. After I've got the queen side locked down, I go for the king side. And while this may have been inaccurate play from me, I kept the position complicated enough, and also bore in mind other factors, including the time limits in the game, to eventually create a tactical minefield and win the game. And the final position after this, all his pieces are basically hanging, apart from the knight. His king's being checked, his rook's being attacked, his bishop's being attacked, his queen's is going to be attacked after I take the bishop, and my pieces just dominate the board. So I was very pleased with this win, and I hope you found the video fun. So comment, like, subscribe, and see you next time. Bye.